Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm very excited tonight to have this special guest live with me. I'll give it a minute to let everybody kind of come into the chat, let their notifications hit. Okay, I've got some decor lit, so come get these blessings. Okay. So go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell them who you are, what you're about, where they can find you.
I am the Nerdy Warlock. You can just call me Warlock. And you can find me on YouTube and Instagram under the Nerdy Warlock. And basically, if it's nerdy, I'm into it, especially magically.
And where can they find you?
Instagram, YouTube, the Nerdy Warlock on both of those.
And I have links. Yeah, I have linked the Nerdy Warlocks YouTube down in the description. I just want to make sure and double check, but it is linked down in the description. So definitely check out their channel as well. And you can connect with them on Instagram, like they said. So let's get right into the gig here, Warlock, and let's talk about it. So we talked a little bit about this off air. But how would you define Warlock? Because Warlock can be kind of controversial in the craft.
Right.
So talk to me about that.
Well, for me, Warlock is just something that I personally connect with regardless of its meaning. However, I would remind people that we do not know what it actually means. However, a lot of people have kind of just decided that we're going to go with the idea that it does mean Oathbreaker. And so for that reason, a lot of people do not like it. And there are some sects of Satanism that embrace the term Warlock, and that can also irk people. But for me, if it means Oathbreaker and we accept that as its definition, then I find that extremely empowering because all of us, me, you, all of us make these promises, whether they're conscious or not, these oaths, to behave a certain way, to act a certain way, and to believe a certain way. And a lot of times those promises are not good for us. They're poisonous and they prohibit our growth spiritually, mentally, physically, in every way. And I think it's up to us to break those promises, to break those oaths. So being an oath breaker can be an extremely positive and empowering thing. It doesn't have to be negative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think for anyone who's seen my channel, I have really nothing against someone going against the status quo or rebelling against society's expectations that, really don't serve you.
Right. Yes, we would not advance as civilizations if we didn't rebel and break the status quo constantly. Then we would just stay stagnant. There's no room for growth or learning if you just stay within one little stream. You've got to
Yeah, and I've definitely seen a lot of folks, especially within the left-hand path craft, Warlock is something to be celebrated and embraced. That's kind of all about going against taboos and society norms. But I've also seen people kind of shit on the term and really not like it, because there's this perception that warlocks are male witches, and that kind of perpetuates this idea that witches are just women, and anyone who practices the craft, who's any variety of male, because we have varieties and here, is a warlock. And I think that's also really kind of a negative stereotype, because I do think that if a man or a masculine identifying person wants to use the label witch, I think they should be able to. I don't think it should be gatekept by, sexual identity or gender or anything like that.
Oh, I totally agree. I, un, well, from my personal experience, I've experienced both sides where there's been so many people who are like, yeah, you use the term witch, men are witches, trans people are witches, non-binary people can be witches, everyone can be witches. But then the minute you decide that you don't want that term, and maybe you want to pick a different term, then I've experienced a lot of hate. But then also I've been on the other side where they're like, well, you're biologically male, so there's no way you could use the term witch. Witch is women. So I've experienced both sides, like in mass. It's not like one was quieter than the other. So I think that can be very confusing to navigate, especially if you're new to the path. Trying to find like your space, because I feel like so many people want to dictate what space you fit into, and that's just not right. That's not fair, especially in a path that's supposed to be so off the beaten path anyway, and so different and against like the majority of what society, is following. You would think that there would be more room for open-mindedness.
Yeah, but oftentimes there isn't, unfortunately. I've encountered that in the craft as well, like for a multitude of different reasons. I made a video the other day actually talking about this like toxic positivity culture that I feel
Um,
like there is in the craft, especially within like new ageism. And this kind of like whole concept of like this light and love, shove a rose quartz crystal up your ass, pretend
yeah.
everything's okay. Like that's not really my gig. And like if that's someone else's gig, great. You go shove a rose quartz up your ass and let me be pissed. Like let me be angry for a
Yeah,
minute.
exactly.
Like let me sit with that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. I had my own journey early on with love and light people, and I really tried to be that person. And so now I have lots of several cringy videos and photos of that time period where I was really trying to do that. But that's just the same. That's not for me. And if it's for you, that's awesome. But it's not for me though.
So tell us a little bit about like your path. How would you define what you practice or your religious beliefs? If you had to use a label, what labels would you choose and why?
First and foremost, I like to approach things religiously or spiritually as just as a mystic, you know? I really like that term because there's no dogmas attached to mystic and there's no specific religion. You can be a mystic in anything. Um, and also I think mystic it's also kind of like a synonym for a scholar or for someone who is just ravenous for knowledge, and I identify as that. So first and foremost, I always try to read and learn as much as I can about something before I really pursue it spiritually, especially if I'm trying to learn new things in my spiritual path. So yeah, mystic. But then if we're gonna like get specific, I do predominantly work with the Celtic pantheon. Um, However, I'm not stuck with that. Like I definitely feel the freedom to work with anything and anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and as for like, do I believe the gods are actually real? Yes and no. A lot of what I believe is very like paradoxical. But that I would go on with that forever if you asked me to expand on
Yeah,
that.
and that was actually my next question. I don't know if you've seen some of my lives or not, but in terms of theism, would you consider yourself to be like a polytheist, a monotheist, a pantheist, a soft polytheist, a hard monotheist, a non-theist? What is theism and what is the belief in, like you said, you are connected very much to the more Celtic pantheon, though you're not limited to that exclusively. What does theism look like for you? And what is your belief in God or the gods or X, Y, and Z, whatever? Like, what does that really mean for you?
That is so hard to answer. um, well, I would definitely consider myself I guess, a polytheist. Um, I kind of subscribe to the like Hindu belief that all of the gods in every religion and time period and space exist and they are valid, but that they are all kind of can be boiled down to like one energy source. If that
Like
makes sense.
Brahma. Yeah.
Brahma. Yeah. I very much subscribe to that, and I think that like that energy, that God force, um, appears to you however it needs to appear to you to reach you. I don't think it. I think it's genderless, formless. Um, but at the same time, sometimes I go back and forth. Sometimes I don't think that, and I think that like maybe even if it's all fake, right? And let's take an atheistic approach, that it doesn't matter ultimately if they're real or not. Because even if you're just imagining all of this in your mind, as long as it's helping you keep your shit together and like, oh, can I curse on here?
Yeah,
As
you
long as
can.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
As long as you can, as long as it helps you keep your shit together and you're not like, a bad person, it doesn't matter if they're real or not, you know? So at the end of the day, I don't really have finite answers on a lot of stuff. Um, I kind of like a multiple choice.
Do you think that for you, some of that kind of plays into like what you said earlier with like being a mystic, as kind of being a scholar and just like very much being committed to learning more and more as much as you can about whatever it is that you're learning about? Like, do you think
Yeah,
that's more of like a mystic's approach?
I think so. I think it's a very scientific approach, definitely. I think it's smart to gather as much information as you can before making a finite answer on anything. But then realizing, even when you think you have your answer, that it is immutable, that your answer to anything could change at any time. So while I may believe that the gods are real, they physically exist out in space somewhere, I need to be able to change that opinion later down the road when I learn something more, you know?
So, do you believe the gods are sentient and eternal beings of physical or metaphysical manifestation? Or would you say that you believe that the gods are more archetypal and represent kind of like a human projection and perspective? Or do you believe both simultaneously or none of the above?
Well, all of the above, but I I do think that the gods at this time, as you're asking me, I do believe that the gods are sentient and real, and that they exist somewhere in the fabric of this existence. Um, However, I think sometimes I do think that maybe they are archetypes, because as you learn more, you realize that there are so many gods that are almost exactly the same from
Mhm.
cultures that did not have communication with each other at the time of these gods um, revealing themselves to the people, we'll say. So, like, you have Thor, the god of a lot of things, but the god of thunder over in Norseland. But then you have over in Africa Shango, who's also a god of like thunder and lightning, and who has typically in art a double-sided axe, which is that's like very similar to Thor. So you could say that Thor maybe evolved from the peoples who traveled and worshipped Shango, or you could say that they are the same god that is somehow revealing himself in different ways to people, or you could say that they're just two massively different gods who exist to fulfill different needs. Um, but at this time, I just don't have definite answer or decision that I've made on any of that. I just think it's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of feel like, you know, I consider myself to be, if I had to pick a label for theism, I'm very much someone who I would consider to be more of a soft polytheist.
Mhm.
Very soft, very soft polytheism. And when I say soft polytheism, like, I feel like polytheism has this idea that like all of the gods exist and exist separately.
Mhm.
And that's not my experience. That's not my tea. Okay. If that's your tea, great. But my tea is that, yes, these gods exist. Like what you talked about with Thor and Django. Like, do I believe these gods exist? Yes. And I believe that gods I don't even know their names of theoretically exist. Right. But
Right.
I also am very much a big believer in like the universe or source or what we were talking about from the Vedas, like Brahma, that all of these gods are just incarnations of Brahma that are called different names and given different personality traits by the various cultures and geographic locations that they've come from. Because there is so much overlap with these gods that it's almost like different cultures and different people around the world from different language and geographic backgrounds have like almost kind of worked with the same universal energy just by a different name.
Agree. Yeah, I do sometimes wonder if there is like maybe like a default pantheon of deity out there that kind of manifests itself in all of these similar deities. You know, like there's like a default hunter god or huntress goddess, you know, that takes on all these different forms to different cultures. But you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. So, another question for you, another philosophy question is what is your opinion, if any opinion, of the afterlife? What do you think happens when we die?
it's really interesting that you said that because I've been pondering that specifically actually a lot lately. So it's crazy that you brought that up. Um, this might sound a little bizarre and like wacko, cracko, I don't know. But lately I've been coming to the self realization that I do believe that the afterlife exists in some form, but I do kind of feel like the afterlife experience is different for each individual. I don't believe in one set afterlife. Like I don't believe like yes, I believe in the Christian heaven, and I do believe in the other world. I believe in all of them. I really do. I think that they all exist for those individuals. Does that make sense? That's not to
Would you
say
say I've seen like some funny like comics and stuff where it's like someone dies and the Grim Reaper like comes to come get them and they like take them to their corresponding afterlife that they believed in life. So like, this person goes to heaven and this person goes to like the summer lands and this person who believed they were going to go to hell their whole life goes to hell and like this person gets reincarnated and like I don't know,
Mhm.
I've seen a comic like that.
That sounds great actually, but um, yeah, kind of like that. But I think it's almost like have you ever seen that movie with Robin Williams where he goes to the afterlife and everything's like a painting and it shifts and changes?
I think so.
I kind of think it's like that, where it's like, which kind of makes it sound like it's a simulation. But I believe that it is like this energy space that you enter, and your thoughts and experiences project onto that space, and that is what creates your afterlife. Which is why I would say I believe in the Christian heaven, because if that was your view of afterlife and that's it, that's all you got, then that's what you're gonna get. Um, but I don't think that it's not a finite location. Do you know what I mean? It's a mutable.
Would you believe that someone their entire life who believes that they are, destined to go to hell would also go to hell then in their afterlife?
Um, perhaps. Uh, Mostly I want to say yes because I mean we do that in life now. That's like if you just want to be miserable and like you know destructive and punish yourself, you're gonna experience that now, like right now. So you're already creating hell on earth for yourself. So by the time you die, I don't think you just gain immediate like perception and omniscience. You're not like, oh, I see what I did wrong in life. I think once you die, you're still got that. So when you transition to there, I think that if that was your predominant mind space, then that's what's going to be your, you know, other space. So yeah, kind of.
Another question for you, and this is totally unrelated to what we were just talking about, that you've been on YouTube, I think you said earlier before we went on air, since like 2016.
Right.
So how's your experience been? Because like being a practitioner or a warlock or a witch or a mystic or whatever, living that in the physical world is one thing, but also being in the digital realm as like someone who's practicing and making content or education or just sharing their experiences, like how has your experience been on this platform?
Mostly great. Mostly great, honestly. I'm a very introverted person, so getting to communicate with people on like my own terms, right, and like without physically being around them is like very very good for me. Um, so I've met so many people from so many different kinds of paths that I never would have in my real life, and so that's been the best part. But then of course also, putting yourself out there and talking about paganism and this opens yourself up to a lot of criticism too. And so I've experienced a lot of that as well. Um, but mostly it's been like really awesome and empowering and very nurturing for me.
And what made you decide to get onto this platform to begin with?
This is going to sound really shady and mean and maybe egotistical,
We can be a
but
little mean and shady here. That's okay.
right. But I did it because I kept seeing these people make videos with stuff that was just like fucking crazy, like just wacko cracko crap. And people were like in the comments were just like eating it up, and these people had like lots of subscribers and were spreading this personal gnosis, which is fine. But they were spreading their personal gnosis as if it was just like, the Holy Bible. And people were loving it, and I was like, this is not cute. Like some of the information they were spreading is just totally not factual, like historically speaking. And it was also just kind of damaging, I felt. And so I thought, I mean, I feel like it's my time to get in here and set some of this crap straight, because if those kinds of people were at the time, not so much now, were taking up so much of the pagan space on YouTube, I was like, that's not right. I've got to go in there and shake that up. That's not cute. Like,
So, absolutely, when we're off air, I need to hear more specifics about this.
sure.
Once we're off air, because I have been watching like the witch tube or pagan tube
Mhm.
probably since like maybe 2014, 2015 or so. So I've seen a lot of witches kind of come and go from the platform.
Right.
And maybe I know what you're talking about, but if I don't, I would love to be enlightened after the air. I would love
Sure.
for you to fill me in and pour me a heavy cup of tea. Because here on the lives, we can be a little shady, we can be a little messy. But some things are best kept for off air, you know?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
So,
I've been
and
watching. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and for everyone watching too, like, with all respect to our viewers, like, there are just some conversations that are going to happen off air.
Right. 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 No, I was just going to say that I've been watching specifically like magically oriented pig or YouTube videos since around, I'm gonna say 2008, maybe 2009. And yeah, like you said, there's been so many people that have come and like taken over this space, and some of them great and awesome, but then some they don't last. And luckily, I feel like a lot of the ones that don't last are the ones that are kind of spreading mass misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's like the digital gods, like watching out for us. I don't know. But yeah, some things are best just to be, private conversations between two individuals or more.
So not to get too specific, because I respect like your privacy, but the land that you live on, the area that you live in, does your local area or the land that you reside on influence your path or practice, if any, if at all? Like, do you feel any sort of connection to the land? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
Yes, most definitely yes. But that brings up a lot of feelings for me. So I live in Alabama. Cue lots of Southern jokes now. And I literally live in the Bible Belt on the map. I live on the buckle of the Bible Belt. And I'm also in the area of the South called the Deep South. So I'm like way in there. So Protestant Christianity is everywhere and influences everything, like literally everything, even like you going through the drive-through at a fast food place. And that's not a joke. Like it's everywhere. It's everywhere. Um, so with that said, I do feel tied to my area specifically and to the land. But when I first started working with kind of the, I guess you could say, the spirit of the nature around me where I lived, I immediately encountered a lot of, I guess, like negativity and darkness. And some of that was because of, slavery happened here. There's still lots of monuments to that here, but that's another conversation.
Right.
There's preserved plantations that we still have here. Um, I know. So that's very much in like your consciousness, and I can only imagine if I was a person of color how that would be. But that really came up a lot at first, but it did not deter me. And I say that because I feel like if someone wanted to work with the land of their area, just know that if you experience a lot of negativity at first, or maybe like bad energy, I think it's necessary to kind of work through that. And don't think that like your land is just tainted and cursed or inhabited by like bad forces, because it's not. You just have to realize that, Native American people, Black people, like there's been a lot of history that's not so great in our land, but there's so much good stuff in there if you just dig it out. And what I think is exciting about that is it's not really written about. So, we can look at like the history of the spirits of the land of like Ireland and learn so much about what that's like. But North America, not so much. So there's so much to discover there, so much information to pull from the land, if you just choose to do so. And I just find that exciting.
That's definitely something that I have been like trying to connect with more myself, is like, I would say within like the past 2 years or so, like as a witch, like I live in Indiana, which is also very conservative, also has a very troubled past. Lots of problematic spirits here on this land for more than one reason. Like, not to get into like politics or anything like that, but like, electric shock therapy for gay people is
Yeah.
born from the state that I live in, which
Yes, it
is
is.
so horrendous and heinous, in my opinion, and so sick. And I can't wrap my head around that. But, trying to connect more with the spirits of the land that I reside on, because I feel like as a witch, like that's something that I want to work on more in my practice, is really connecting with the land that I live on. And when I'm looking for information on like, you know, native tribes in my area and lore of my area, a lot of the information, for one, as someone who's a non-native person, it's pretty inaccessible. And for two, like what you were saying, a lot of it has not been publicly written about to where someone who's non-Indigenous could access this. And like, I am not seeking to access this information to like make it my own or anything. I want to access it so I can properly respect, the Indigenous spirits of the land that I'm on, because I live here. And I feel
Right.
like in my craft, and as kind of an animist in a way, like really working with those spirits is something that I think would be really beneficial because I live on their land.
Right. I totally agree. I live in an area. Are you familiar with the Trail of Tears?
Yeah.
So the city that I live in, they came through here on their way up, and so every year there's like a reenactment of it, which is like very problematic because it's nothing but white people. But um, that's very prevalent here. Like people talk about it, and there's a whole festival around it. And for me, that was one of the things that I really wanted to dig into when I wanted to work with the land. Was I wanted to kind of walk some of that path for myself and kind of help transmute some of that dark energy. But also the Tennessee River, because we're right below Tennessee in Alabama, it comes right through here as well. And my city is you should say like a port city. And so for me, immersing myself in the Tennessee River and calling out to the spirit of like Tennessee was like very cathartic for me. And it was not what I expected. So that kind of goes back to what I said before, where it's like you may have preconceived notions of what it's like to work with the land, but specifically here in North America, I think you will just find it totally mind blowing if you really decide to just dive into it, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. For sure. And it's sad that there's like, at least where I live, I feel like the land is fundamentally tainted, you know?
Mm, yeah.
And it's
Well,
hard for me to like work through and past some of just like the sick shit that has gone on, like,
right.
and that has been perpetuated in our state. Um, so, but yeah, we could fall down the rabbit hole there.
We
Um,
could. Well, like one good thing, and this probably happens everywhere, I'm sure, but one good thing that I have found in my area is we have a festival in like September, which it didn't happen this year because of COVID, but there's a festival where a lot of native tribes come and travel from all over the US back to here, and hold a festival called Okakapasa, where they get to share like their cultures. And it's so cool and so empowering, to to hear about native things from native people. um, and that hearing about how they view the land and the stories that they have about the land helps kind of override for me my own preconceived notions about some of the bad stuff in the land. And so I think by conversing with native people about the land specifically, it helped me kind of bypass some of that, you know?
mhm, for sure.
And also to what you said, about like your area being fundamentally like the um for all we know, because we don't have recorded history of it, for all we know, there are probably parts of the US that are considered fundamentally meh to native people, but we don't have that information anymore, you know?
Well, and what's interesting about my state is like being a witch and a practitioner in Indiana, like it's wild because our state is very traditionally conservative and Christian and red. And although Indiana was technically part of the Union and not on the Confederate side, there are a lot of people here who are very poor, unfortunate souls.
Yeah.
And it's weird because we're not the South, but there's a lot of people here who have this idea that we are, and we're definitely not the South at all.
Yeah.
And so there's a huge conflict, like here in our state, when it comes to those social issues. And Indiana also, um, our state actually had like the first pagan pride in all of the 50 states before there even was like a pagan pride coalition.
That's awesome.
So there's a lot of like Freemason history here. There's a lot of occultism here. And it's weird because you wouldn't expect it from like Indiana of all
Right.
places, but we have a really huge and diverse, um, I would say, pagan community and occultist community, um, which is something that I'm thankful for. Like, if there's one thing I can say about where I live in my state, is like, I can at least appreciate the fact that there is so much magic and magical people where I live, and that it's very accessible to find a magical community, because it's all over. Even in like my own like city. I live in the capital of Indiana, Indianapolis, and there is about 9 very prominent metaphysical stores and less than like a 30-minute drive from each other.
That's awesome. I'm so jealous.
Yeah, I really like that about my state, is
That's
that,
great.
and it's funny too, because like I work at a metaphysical store. But all of the metaphysical stores offer something special, you know, and they're all so different that it's not really like it's not as competitive, I think, as most people would think it is, because like that's a lot of stores and like a relatively small area. But because they're all so different and kind of like carry, I mean, they all kind of carry like metaphysical things. Like you're going to find crystals at all of them. You're going to find like statuary and like divination tools at all of them, but they all kind of have like their own little vibe.
That's awesome. We had one one store for many years, but it was undercover as a salon. Where like literally it was a salon in the front, and then if you knew the person who owned it, she would let you go to the back where there was another room that was all metaphysical things to purchase. And that was like our hub and our saving grace for a long time. But that's been gone for over 10 years now. And there's nothing like that here. If there were to be, it would receive, I know, so much hate. Like when that store that I spoke of originally opened and did not have the salon front, windows were thrown, bricks were thrown through the windows and spray painted, and it was defiled constantly. So that's why she kind of had to hide the store, like actually hide the store. So, and as for community, there are definitely pagan people here. They're everywhere, but not a lot, and not a lot that are willing to be vocal, which is very unfortunate. So it's very much a solitary practice here in North Alabama.
So where do you go, like, I guess then in your area, if you're looking to purchase like metaphysical supplies or tools, do you get a lot of your stuff online? Do you go to another city or town? Like,
Well, this is gonna sound crazy, but actually I make a lot of my own stuff, because that's kind of just what you have to do here. And yes, I do some of the internet shopping, but mostly it's just things that I make myself. However, I find a lot of hidden treasures at like 99-cent stores. There's
hell
like,
yeah.
yeah, there's so much there that is like can be so pagany if you just have the eye for it. Like it's crazy. But like if I wanted like statues or anything like that, I would definitely have to order from online. But I made my own figurines out of Santa Claus and snowman wooden figures that I bought one year, and I just washed them off and recolored them.
That's
So
cool.
I'm kind of forced to be extremely crafty here. If not, then I just have to use the internet.
I mean, that's cool though, for
Oh yeah,
sure.
because it helps you connect to it more because it's your energy's all over it now. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. What sort of advice would you give anyone who maybe is coming into the craft now, who might be watching this live or watching this as a replay? What advice would you give them for new people into the craft?
The first thing I was going to say was break the rules, but that might be a little chaotic and problematic to give as your first advice. Honestly, I would say if you're new and you don't know where to begin, there's so many like 101 books on Wicca and witchcraft. But for me personally, I would say I know that when I was coming to it, I'm instinctively a person who wants to go off to the side. So don't feel like you have to immediately learn about Wicca or witchcraft. There's a lot of other paths you can explore, a lot of books to explore. So, and I would say don't feel pressured to build an elaborate altar space immediately either. Just let things unfurl slowly. Don't feel so much like you have to just, you know, jump right in and like, now I'm pagan, you know? Let yourself slowly kind of like step in there because I think that's how you're going to create lasting, that's how you're going to find lasting changes for you in your life through paganism, is to kind of like, you know, browse first before you commit to a purchase. You know what I mean? Like spiritually speaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in the craft, I do see, there's a lot of anti-capitalistic natures and like don't don't feel like you have to go rush out and buy every single thing that like you see in a book, or every like traditional altar tool or whatever, or you don't have to necessarily have an entire like herbal apothecary and own every single herb. Like, you know, a lot of the herbs that you might use in your craft are also herbs that you might already have in your kitchen. And why not, you know, use some of these culinary herbs as opposed to, you know, spending $200, $300, $500, $700 on building an herbal apothecary of stuff that you're only going to use. I don't know. Like, that's what I see a lot of, is like urging new witches to not feel the need to go out and just buy.
Right. And I would say, don't feel like you have to immediately know who your god and goddess is. I've seen so many people stress about that. Like really stress on it because they're like, no one's reaching out to me, nobody's speaking to me. I feel like I'm being rejected by the gods. Like, it's okay.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt this, but speaking of rejection, my pug has been like scratching at my door. So give me 1 second. I don't know if you can see the chat on your side or not, but if there's any questions or comments, or if anyone watching has any questions for Warlock, feel free to comment down below. I have to go take care of my baby for 1 second. She's freaking out. Give me 1 second. Hold, please. Oh, please. I'll be right back. Hold, please.
Yeah. I'm in the middle of a thought. I can't remember what it was. Oh, but yeah, I would just say, do not feel like you have to find your god and goddess, because you might not even have one, and that's okay. Also, maybe you just have 2 goddesses. Maybe you have no gods. Maybe you only have gods and no goddesses. Maybe you only work with spirits like fae. Just be open to learning the rules, but bending the rules and making the rules work for you. Don't make yourself work for the rules. Have the rules work for you. I mean, honestly. Oh my gosh, she has so many books. I recently gave away like maybe 4 bookcases worth of books. And now I totally regret it. Oh, jealous. Oh, can I even see these questions? Let's see. Nope. Nope. Well, kind of. I wish I could see what was on her bookshelf. Ugh.
Oh, the poor baby. I'm back. Did I miss anything?
No, I just kind of rambled, but it's fine.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, okay, I'm looking here at the chat. Staying safe. I just want to take a moment here in the chat to like say thank you to everyone who's come in. Thank you, Animist, for joining. You're a soldier. You're always here for me. I appreciate that. You're always on my videos and my streams. So much love to you. Hex, if you're still watching, thank you for joining. I really enjoyed our live stream the other night. Tarot by Kimberly, Lioness Heart, thank you for joining. Tina, thank you for joining. Marge, thank you for joining. Uncle Badger, thank you for joining. Yes. Is there any... Okay, Marge is asking, is there any day or time that you are scheduled to be on? I would like to get you on my planner. Scheduled to be on as in like scheduled videos or scheduled lives? Because the thing with my lives is that as of right now, they're a little bit like sporadic. So I typically don't have them planned very far in advance. For example, for like our live tonight with the Warlock, like I literally just messaged them. Well, we've been messaging, I would say, for like maybe the past week or a couple days or so. I don't know, but I just messaged them and I was like, hey, I planned on going live tonight. Like, do you want to join? I don't know. Like, and they said yes. And I was like, okay, cool. So, and like my live with Hex, like that wasn't really planned either. So my lives are a little bit sporadic, and I tend to announce them like on my Patreon first and let everyone know that I'm going to go live. And then I just kind of like pop up here. So I'm not sure if that answers your question or if that's what you meant, but yeah. Yeah, my lives are all over the place. So, okay. Did you have any questions for me, Warlock? I feel like I've drilled you with some questions. If you don't have any questions for me, that's fine. But I didn't want you to feel like I was just going to drill you for an hour and be Nancy Grace on the case, though I do love being Nancy Grace on the case.
Oh my God, yes. Well, I mean, these are probably questions you've been asked like 800 times, and you probably already answered on your channel too. But, like, what age were you when you started? Not necessarily practicing, but like, when did you really first start? Kind of getting the inkling of like, this is something I want to pursue. Because I feel like for most of it, it's pretty young.
I would say like what I wanted to pursue would probably be more like about 16, 17. I first kind of like, when I first started learning about the craft, I would have been probably about 12 or 13. And a lot of this stuff in terms of the craft, like I was kind of introduced to via my family. So like, for example, like oftentimes weddings are not going to be planned without like looking at astrology. Now, my family would not tell you that's witchcraft, right? But like, I have kind of a different opinion on that. I think that astrology kind of falls under that umbrella, or like the practice of like Mamluk, which is like essentially using regular ass playing cards to practice divination. Like that was a very normal practice in my family, and they would not call that witchcraft, but like I would. So like I grew up around some of this, or like I think on my channel I've showed some videos before, and I'm hoping to actually like have my grandmother on the channel because she's just so cool and such an inspiration for me. But like, growing up with my mother and my grandmother, they were very big forces in my life and still are. But like growing up, because of my family history and my background and everything, like, I wasn't as close with my dad. So for me, my mother and my grandmother, they're mostly who raised me through childhood. And then I have my stepfather, who he is very much like, I call him Pops, like he's very much my dad. But he kind of came into the picture a little bit later. So like growing up, there was very much like a love for Egyptology and Chemeticism, and we had like canopi jars over our fireplace mantle and papyrus of like Bast and Sekhmet and Anubis, like by the grand piano, and like there's like a bust of Hatshepsut like over the bookcase in my grandmother's living room. And I didn't really start to actualize and really like understand that, the idea of like God or gods or whatever, or magic, probably until I was like about 13, 14. And I wasn't super into it at the time. I thought that a lot of my family's, cultural practices or religious beliefs were like, I don't know, I was almost kind of embarrassed by it when I was younger because it was something that made me different. And I think that when we're really young and when we're kids, like if there's anything different about you, kids are just so mean sometimes. And I wanted to really just be, normal, whatever that is. And I'm still not sure what normal is. Like I'm still kind of trying to figure out what normal is. Not that I really care much more, like now that I'm an adult, like, and that's kind of why, like, when I was talking to you about like warlock, like that's why I really kind of appreciate one of the definitions or meanings of it being oath breaker. Cause to me, I think can be a beautiful thing to kind of like rebel against the status quo and like really embrace this whole like black sheep aspect, because that's always how I felt. Like, I personally don't use warlock to identify myself. I just use witch, but I've always felt very much like the black sheep, and I am the black sheep in my family. You know, my family is a little bit more, um, you know, they wouldn't call themselves witches, but in my opinion, a lot of the stuff that they do is inherently like witchy. Um, you know, they would consider themselves to be probably more like traditional. And so, you know, me being who I am with all of this, honey, you know, is a little much sometimes for my family. So the idea of rebelling against that and standing firm in who you are and what you are and not apologizing for it, for me has always been like very attractive, to not have to feel like you have to be normal, because like normal is so subjective anyway.
Right, right.
So
So, do you have like specific cultural influences on your path or no? Because I feel like most people do, but
yeah, I would say like on my path, like, and my path has changed so much. Even in the short amount of time I've been on YouTube, my path has changed. You know,
Mhm.
the type of witch I was, you know, when I first started identifying with the label of witch, when I was like 17 or so, like, is totally not at all the witch I am today. But one consistent theme that I continuously go back to is like essentially Kemet and the Egyptian deities, because that is something that I grew up around. It's not always been something that I necessarily work with in a religious way, but it's more of like a cultural, familial, familiar like aspect for my path. And also connecting with like Sihir, which is like more of the Arabian style conjure magic. Some of that is found within the Quran and some is not. Like, that is something I've been very interested in all my life, and that influences my practice. But like also something totally unrelated to my culture, but influences my practice. It's like I have always felt very connected to like the Raven Queen and the Morgan. Like, I have an altar for her. She's like tattooed on my arm.
Mhm.
And that is not something, to my knowledge, that I have in my like ancestry or anything. That's just something that I've always felt very drawn to. And like the connection between like the Morgan and Morgana Le Fay, because growing up I was a huge like Arthurian legend like slut.
Me
Like,
too.
I just loved everything Arthurian legend. So I think that's a big influence for me too on my path.
That's awesome. I was gonna ask, like, how do you? Because right now we live in such a time that is like so PC, which is good and bad. I feel. Um, do you feel obligated, I guess, to? I guess not obligated, but do you feel like you cannot really fully invest in a culture that is not your own? Do you feel like that's just totally appropriation? If you decided, oh, I'm going to pursue hoodoo exclusively and that's it, just hoodoo, and I want to be a root worker. Do you feel like you just cannot do that, or do you feel like you could do that in a respectful way? Because I know there's opinions on both sides for that specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that hoodoo is its own, there's its own thing there that I think needs to be addressed. I don't consider myself a root worker or a practitioner of hoodoo. Um, I have a lot of friends who are, and like I very much understand the fact that like this is very much an ancestral religion and
Right.
an ancestral like practice. So for some people whose ancestors might have done X, Y, and Z, I understand like that concern there. But for me, in terms of my own experiences, like I've never had someone tell me, I'm sorry, like you can't work with the Morgan because you're not X, Y, or Z. I've never had someone tell me like you can't explore Celtic spirituality. Um, because like you're not. And I have had though like people on my channel talk to me and basically tell me that okay, here's an example. Okay. So one example of this is, and this is probably about like maybe a month ago.
Oh, you better work White Claw. I see that.
Yeah, this is the mango flavor. But I had someone come onto my channel, a white woman come onto my channel to inform me. Her comment was something along the lines of like, hi, like, I noticed that in your haul video you were wearing a bindi, and I just want you to know that like if that's not your culture, like that's appropriation. And like, but it is.
Can I just say, like, so cultural appropriation. Yes, it can be bad, right? When someone takes something from a culture and just uses it without not knowing what they're doing, right? Because they just think it's cool. You know, like I'm going to wear a kimono, but I have no idea that it's called a kimono or where it comes from or what its meaning is. Like, I understand the upset with that, certainly. However, if we look at cultural appropriation from, I'm such a nerd, but anyway, if we look at cultural appropriation from a historic context, cultural appropriation is how the world evolved and how it came to where we are today. Like, if cultural appropriation did not exist, cultures would die. They would not continue to thrive because a culture it can't just eat its own tail and keep going.
But I don't know. I think it's a double-edged sword too, because I think also through that there is so much misinformation and lost information. Like, look at what we were talking about earlier with like, indigenous people's lore. Like, we have no access to that. So I think it's a double-edged sword, and I don't pretend to have, the right answers to that. I just know that for me, when it comes to the topic of hoodoo, I will always support the voices of those people and let them speak for it. I cannot speak for what is appropriate or not appropriate for a white person to do in a hoodoo space, because I don't feel like that's my right, personally.
Right. Totally. What was I going to say? Oh, I was just going to say, like, America, we are we are a neo-Rome, okay? Like, we are Rome, just in modern day. Like, the Romans took so much and rewrote their own culture in favor of cherry-picking from other people's cultures. And like you said, so much information was lost because of that. It makes me think of, like, the Greek and Roman gods. They're always equated and said that they're the same, but they're totally different, in my opinion. Like, Zeus and Jupiter are not the same deity. They don't even preside over the same things. Like Poseidon and Neptune. Poseidon, yes, Greek god of the ocean, true, historically speaking. But Neptune, before the influence of Poseidon on the Romans, Neptune was a freshwater deity, and his wife was the saltwater deity. It's just wild. It's wild. Cultural appropriation. It's wild.
Yeah. And I think that my main like kind of stance on that is listen to the people whose culture it is. And also like don't tell me that I'm appropriating also my own culture.
Yeah, like, totally.
That's weird, sis. That's weird. Yeah. Like, thank you for feeling like you need to come out here and defend and this and that, but like, I don't know if you know who you're talking to.
Right. Like you said with the Morgan, I've had that happen to me quite a bit, specifically with the Morgan. Told that I can't because I'm American. And I'm constantly like, okay, my grandfather was born in Ireland and came here. So I have Irish in me, maternally and paternally. So that means I can do that. Like, it just doesn't make sense. But what you said, that opens it up, I think, to something totally different, which is like gatekeeping. I feel like that is such a problem in the witch/pagan community on the internet. I don't
Well,
know
you
why
have all
people
these
do.
people, you have all these people online who think that they're like the witch police or
Yeah,
something, and they're going to run
yeah,
around and tell people, you're not a witch, you're not a witch, you are
yeah.
a witch, and you're not a witch.
Yeah,
Like,
but what kills me is those people, in my experience specifically, those people have always been people who were like literally 13 years old. Or they are someone who has literally only been practicing any kind of paganism for like 6 months or something. And I'm like, why are you suddenly the police when you're brand new here, girl? Like, you just walk through the door, work the room first. Like, you know what I mean? It's just wild.
it is. It is. I'm looking at the time here, and we've been streaming for about an hour. So we are going to end this stream. I want to thank all of you for joining us. And thank you again, Warlock, for coming onto my channel and like doing this
Ooh.
spur of the moment sort of live.
Yeah.
It's I've appreciated like getting to know you more through this modality and
Ooh.
talking to you. And I would love to have you back again on the channel.
I love that.
So yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thanks.